And why do you do that?
Thank you all for joining us this evening. We are hosting our 9th annual seminar, which is really exciting. And this event was created out of a desire to create dialogue and sharing of best practices around those important, relevant topics that are impacting our nonprofit community. We've been fortunate to have many thought leaders over those 9 years share their perspective and their expertise, which helps to spark the conversation and action among the nonprofit community. And in the past, we have shared topics around gaining broad constituency support for your organization's new or proposed projects. We've talked about how good brand strategy can lead to ROI. And then also more recently, going beyond data to harness the power of data analytics for evaluating impact. And today I'm thrilled to say that we are going to focus on future forward thinking for nonprofits. And we're going to be discussing the future of the workplace, technology, and talent. And I'm joined today by the hosting committee that put this event together. My name is Deb Nelson, and I will be your facilitator for the morning. I'd like to thank Maria, Katie, Sarah, Kelly, and Jacqueline for their time and input as we finalize the event this year. Our attendance has continued to grow year over year, which energizes us to keep putting this together on an annual basis. And we hope that you enjoyed the pre-event package that was sent out to the first 100 RSVPs. While we would love to be back in person, we're just not ready to do that yet. So hopefully those breakfast treats are something that you're enjoying this morning while you're here with us. Our firms are proud to support the BIPOC businesses that provided those treats. And I'd also like to give out a huge thank you to Becca Rosemark, who is our regional marketing coordinator at Eide Bailly. She kept this committee on task and has handled all of the logistics for today's seminar. And for those that are not familiar with the sponsor firms, I'm going to provide just a little bit of background on how we work with nonprofit organizations. Cushman & Wakefield provides local and global real estate advisory services. This includes site selection, lease negotiations, cost reductions, property dispositions, and acquisitions, financing, and project management. Old National Bank can help with banking and complex financing needs and also fundraising strategy. They understand the unique needs of nonprofits and have the experience to get results. And Lathrop GPM assists organizations across the country to operate within a complex, regulated environment creatively and effectively. Their lawyers serve as general counsel to a variety of organizations, including foundations, social service, membership, and issue advocacy organizations. And at Eide Bailly, our CPAs can guide organizations through understanding financial information, how to best communicate with your board, and how changes in activities and structures can impact your tax-exempt status. And with that, I'd like to introduce the panelists for the morning. Jacqueline May is Executive Director of Cushman & Wakefield's MSP Advisory Services team, and she will be speaking to the future of the workplace. Tedrick Hausch with Lathrop GPM leads their firm's work on data privacy, data security, and data breach issues, and he will be speaking to the future of technology. And Philomena Morrissey-Sater serves as Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and External Partnerships at Land O'Lakes. Philomena will be speaking to the future of talent. And as Ali mentioned in the beginning, if you have any questions during the panelist portion of today's seminar, please put those in the chat. I'm going to be monitoring this, and we will have a few minutes after each speaker to ask questions. And in the event we have more than we can get to in between speakers, we're going to hold those over for the breakout rooms after the panelist portion. So with that, Jacqueline, I am going to turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Deb, and good morning, everyone. We wish we could be in person. As Deb mentioned, we're thrilled to be here for 9 years running, and we're looking forward to the next 9 years. And as Deb mentioned, we really value input after each of our sessions, and so you can expect a feedback survey in the days to follow. And it's really your comments, your feedback that inspires the next idea, the next topic of conversation next year. And certainly, I'm excited to be here today. A hot topic on everyone's mind is how is this remote work experience impacting the long-term plans of the workplace? and really important to understand how this is impacting your employee experience. As Deb mentioned, we are a full-service global commercial real estate firm, and we're keenly interested in this whole experience. In fact, we have a global workplace consulting group that studied employee experience pre-COVID. So we had some data points which were really helpful as we started to study the experience during COVID, and as the pandemic continues to kind of improve, if you will, we continue to check in with a variety of employers and their employees to understand this impact and the short-term and long-term potential impact to the workplace. Now, when we're working with our clients and prospective clients, the questions before you are what we're hearing every day. So I thought it might be helpful just to get the conversation started to understand what your peers are going through right now in their organizations. Time and time again, we're getting asked, are people allowing remote work? Were they allowing remote work prior to the pandemic? Are they now allowing more remote work than pre-pandemic, or will you in the future? And lastly, how much of your workforce is back in the office? So we're going to poll the audience right now just to give you a flavor for what your peers in the audience are currently experiencing. Give it a few moments. We'll let our tech team pull all the answers together. Okay, let's start at the top. Did you allow remote work prior to the pandemic? Wow, 78% did. 22% no. Do you now allow more remote work than pre-pandemic, or will you in the future? 88%. And bear with me while I scroll down here. How much of your workforce is back in the office? 30% is kind of the leading contender, with 47% answering that. That is pretty consistent with what we're hearing in the Twin Cities area, is around 20 to 30%. Certainly our Minneapolis CBD suffered civil unrest. There's still some concerns around public safety, so beyond the COVID challenges, but that's an interesting just benchmark. It appears the audience is fairly in line with what we're seeing across the Twin Cities. So as mentioned, this is an area of interest for our organization to understand the employee experience. And we've got a lot of data and research, and we're not going to cover everything today. So I just invite you to reach out if there are any data points that are particularly of interest, or other questions you might have following the discussion today. I'd be happy to discuss that further with you. But a diagnostic tool that Cushman & Wakefield uses is experience per square foot. And if you can focus on the large red numbers, I'll take you left to right. This is all reflecting data points collected in 2020. And effectively, 75% of the people surveyed were working productively. And that is in line with pre-pandemic numbers. So the productivity was not suffering during 2020. However, personal connections and learning was at 50%. So definitely not a good experience, particularly those who were perhaps newer employees and trying to get onboarded in a new organization. And then people were not feeling well, 55%. And if we look back at pre-pandemic numbers, that was at a 73% number. So certainly that well-being was very much impacted. And then interestingly, the younger generation, almost 3/4, we're really struggling. And our data suggests that is really tied to a couple of different things. One, they might be in a home setting that is shared with roommates. So there might have been multiple people at a kitchen counter working at the same time, or they may have young children they were carrying at home with remote learning. The far right number, 4 out of 5 people surveyed said, well, as we look to the future, we are going to expect an employer to offer what we call a workplace ecosystem. In other words, embracing the idea that remote work can work, but also recognizing the importance for having an office. Because as you saw, that 50% of personal connections and learning suffering those numbers improve when you're actually in the office, the ability to collaborate, the ability to innovate. And so you need that bricks and mortar. And then lastly, the third, workspace. And that might be stopping in a coffee shop between meetings. And so employees are expecting there's going to be some level of an integrated workplace format. Now, as we study, kind of as we go forward here, sorry, one moment, you can see the images in person every day on the left, hybrid in the middle, remote on the far right. And we're illustrating the percentages of folks that met each of those categories in 2019, 2020, and currently in 2021. So you can see pre-COVID, 75% of people were in the office every day. Now here we are at 2021, 13%. The hybrid model, you know, certainly in 2020, half employees were working in a hybrid model. That's dipped down a little bit to 45%. And on the far right column, permanent remote work was at 12% pre-pandemic. And when we query people today, 42% would prefer to work remotely. So a lot of movement here in the numbers, the message being that it appears some form of hybrid is here to stay. Now, certainly you're going to find differences in types of organizations, the work they do, the type of talent they recruit and retain. But as we will get into this later, you know, that the war for talent is alive and well. And so it's something to be very mindful of in terms of understanding your current employee base and the talent you're looking to recruit. This is a trend, but what we have to always keep in mind is those data points that suggest if you don't have that workplace, that physical workplace to at least meet and collaborate, people are going to miss out on that connection to culture and connection to people. So going forward, an interesting data point that we have found is that it's really important an employer offers choice. What we've experienced during this remote work experience is that it's helpful with work-life balance. You know, I might have a meeting for my child that I've got to get to. So I might be able to squeeze in a little more work time if I'm working from home in the afternoon, as opposed to rushing out the door in rush hour traffic. The data charts on the left, if you are providing choice to your employees, 74% of those employees are reporting a positive workplace experience. And if you're not providing some level of choice, the positive overall experience drops to 45%. And then on the right side, when people choose the office, interestingly, it's the best experience over choosing to work remote. So again, choice is really important. And when people are given the choice, they're often choosing to go into the office, but it's kind of on their terms. Now, certainly as an employer, that's really tough, because if I've got everybody working remotely on certain days and then everybody's coming back into the office and I've made changes to my physical office environment, you've got to be really intentional with that planning. And so what we're hearing and finding different organizations doing, and some of this was happening pre-pandemic, is unassigned seating, hoteling, more robust integration of collaboration spaces. So meeting rooms, conference rooms, or more of like a, you know, coffee style area to visit and collaborate. Now, certainly every organization is different, and you may end up finding space that is in a building that offers those types of amenities. It's not actually within your physical office space, but you've got an environment where your employee does have choice for different collaboration environments. And then lastly, you know, the three reasons we're finding as we're surveying employees how the office boosts energy. It's reporting sufficient work-life balance. 60% have answered that, and that's meaning 3 days a week or more they're in the office. Reporting high levels of inspiration, and then reporting enough time to be away from work. Certainly in 2020, data points suggest that people were feeling burnt out. They didn't have that on-off ability to turn the work off. It all blended together. In many respects, there was some benefits, but people were feeling burnt out. So as people continue to return to the office and experience more time seeing colleagues in person, those casual collisions, there are reporting more benefits to being in the office. Now, we get the question day in and day out, well, how does that impact how much space I need? And there's no clear answer, right? I'll go back to my earlier comments. It's just really important you understand your current employee base, offer to listen. You know, you're not making any promises or commitments, but you're an engaged employer. You want to understand their well-being, and then think through in terms of the talent you're trying to recruit and retain. What are the types of employers they may be looking at? And so many organizations we're talking to are kind of in a holding pattern, not making any big long-term decisions. Others may have been in office space for a real long time, and they've realized, gosh, when we come back to the office, we really want this to be a place where people want to be. So really being intentional with the environment you're creating at the physical workspace. Now, certainly some organizations may thrive in a remote work environment. So, you know, me as an employee of Cushman & Wakefield, we're not promoting one way or the other, but really understand your employee base and who you're looking to retain. And certainly this next topic, technology, is highly critically important, because without it, you're not going to function well. And that's going to be a big challenge as you look to the future. How do you keep that employee base tied together if you do have some always working from home, some always in the office, and some somewhere in between?
Thank you, Jacqueline. And at this point, I don't see any questions in the chat currently. So I think, Tedrick, we can move straight on to your portion.
Great. Thanks, Jacqueline, for priming us for talking about technology. I expected to be back in my office right after Memorial Day, and then we got hit by the Delta variant. And I heard today in the news that we think, the CDC or someone thinks, that the Delta variant has perhaps peaked. So we just have to look forward to the remaining letters of the Greek alphabet to see which one pops up. But it is an amazing roller coaster we've been on for 20 months in terms of being away from the office and trying to reinvent the workplace really in this short period of time. And so what we're going to talk about today are some of those technologies and the things that you need to be thinking about to make the ties that bind extend to people when they're remote working. And we'll talk about some of the issues that are arising that we're seeing in the workplace for employers, whether nonprofit or for-profit, that they're seeing. But there are some unique concerns and issues that we'll discuss that are for nonprofits to consider. So I'm going to ask a polling question here in a little bit that I wanted to specify that when you think about the technologies that we're using now, they're different than before the pandemic. So Zoom, I think, went from 10 million to 250 million users in about a month and a half. And so just as people have leapt upon these other technologies, everyone has their one of choice. Everyone has had a conference call come up and say, wait, I don't have Google Hangouts or GoToMeeting and have to sign up for it immediately. So we probably have most of those now. But as an employer and a business, you need to decide which one of those is the one that you choose. And so there are some thought processes with those technologies. So when I ask this polling question, I'm really asking, what's the primary one you use for these kinds of communications? And it's not just how you communicate with outside clients, it's how you work as a team. So before we all got hit by the pandemic, IT teams and all kinds of other groups had already started using things like Slack and Asana and Trello as a means of basically getting rid of emailing one another internally within the office and setting up projects where you can track where people are doing things. And it's more like a chat basis if you haven't used one of these. The most prevalent one now is Microsoft Teams. And so Teams is probably the closest we have to an internal mechanism that is sort of the most popular one that businesses are now adopting. I don't know if you've noticed, and this is just my personal experience, not any kind of endorsement, but I find that the Zoom video experience is better than the Microsoft Teams video experience. But those are all things that you want to take into consideration when you are deciding how is everyone in our organization going to communicate internally. Because we are used to seeing people's faces now when we really want to talk to them. And that really does kind of change the whole idea of how work goes. I know for me, when I brought my children, they're older now, they're in their 20s. When I brought them to Bring Your Kid to Work Day, they were not as excited to save the children of a police officer or somebody who did something more interesting. You know, my wife would say, well, how did it go at work today? Well, dad kind of sits on the phone and talks all day and looks at a computer. And that's what a lot of us do. So this is making our experience more interactive, and the base technologies that we use are really key to how that experience is going to evolve. And I think we're going to see more and more technology changes. So let's go to our polling question. And like I said, I'm really asking about what do you guys use? And if you use something other, that's fine too. I don't think there's a place to fill that in. But I'm just curious from my personal perception, how you guys compare. And one of the things is we're waiting for the results that when you're thinking about tech platforms is how well does this platform interact with our other processes? So depending on what Word document system you use, when you work with clients, do you use Google Docs so that you can edit simultaneously? Or do you just simply send Word documents back and forth? Just like, I think the earliest one from my memory that comes up is VHS or Betamax. And there are technologies that are going to struggle to win the day with respect to certain things we do in the workplace. And it's important for your IT department to be involved in all of these operational decisions that you're making. And if you're a small nonprofit, and so, yeah, this is interesting. I appreciate it. If you're a small nonprofit, you probably don't have an IT department. You probably have a person you rely on who either knows more than others, or you have an outsourced group that probably specializes in nonprofits that helps you. It's important to include those people in your discussions, because a lot of what I do is deal with data flow and data privacy and data security. And the liabilities associated with mishandling data are greater than ever. So your first set of architectures for how you're going to handle data and how you're going to use data, it's important to understand that from a technical perspective, even if you aren't a technical person or a technical executive. So I thought I'd start sort of with the basics of what we're doing right now, which is if you're going to have a video conference involving a client where you're going to put on a presentation for the public, there are some things you should think about. We had a waiting room that you guys all sat in, just like going to the doctor, so that we could make sure there wasn't anybody we didn't know that was going to come into it, and also to time things right. And the main thing here to prevent against or prepare yourself for is if you have a bomber who comes in and starts taking over the PowerPoint screen, and there have been numbers of instances where people put political messages, pornography, other things in the middle of a presentation in order to disrupt it. And I know when we were preparing for this, one of the other panelists had been in one recently where that had been attempted, but the host was prepared and was able to exclude that person right away. You don't think about these things. It's like, oh, it would never happen to us, but that's the whole idea behind data protection and data security. So knowing that so far we're doing okay and we haven't had that happen, and I thank all of our participants for not doing so. When we think about remote work, there are a lot of things to address in terms of expectations of your employees. And we've all done all of these on the fly. And even if you haven't made a decision and set out a policy and communicated directly to your employees expressly what you're wanting, you're doing so even by omission. So everyone has sort of answered some of these questions in their own mind. But when you start having people come back to work, one of the difficult questions will be, who has to come back? There will be some positions where you're either working integrally in a team, or that you have to be in the office in order to work with certain technologies where you have to be there. And so you have to deal with making that decision, enforcing that decision, and probably some disgruntled attitudes of those who would prefer to work remotely at home. Attendance is a big issue. And if you haven't noticed it, one of the biggest issues is when we work remotely and we work through technology and we work on our phones, there is an issue with overtime and the wage and hour laws in terms of recording time for non-exempt employees. So we've seen a number of cases where an employee says, hey, I worked 72 hours last week And if you don't have them doing specific time record keeping in accordance with your policies, they'll just say, look, I was on my phone, I was answering emails at 2 a.m, show that I wasn't doing this work. And in those kinds of suits, the presumption is that what the employee said they worked is true unless you can disprove it with your record keeping system. Productivity is an issue, and it gets a bit big brothery at times if you catch someone who's not working by either when they log in or what they're doing on their computer. But it is important in terms of how remote work is progressing and how your organization thrives or doesn't during a period where almost everyone's remote working. So that's something that, again, you either need to address, or if you haven't addressed, think about how productivity is progressing in your organization. Confidentiality I'll come back to, because I'm going to talk about vaccination mandates and vaccination records, but you possess quite a bit of information, not only about your employees, but others, and it's something you need to think about. Equipment, what do you provide and what don't you provide? So if you have employees who don't have the wherewithal to have Wi-Fi and a router, and it's essential they be able to work remotely, those are things you have to address as an employer. And then once you make that decision and have gone down that road, who gets it and who doesn't, and that can create issues. Tech support, this is one of the most crucial areas, because just like when people are working at the office and they get frustrated if they can't get their computer to work or they can't get the system to work, a good tech support system will make remote working a lot different and a lot better. Finally, social media, that happened before and after remote work, but just, I say, use good judgment, people, or you'll get punished if you don't. And then security in terms of what documents you allow people to not only take home in a folder, but what you allow them to download. And what we see a lot is people who are frustrated with what's going on with the work system, they'll send it to their personal email, and now you have potentially confidential data on someone's Gmail, which is easily hacked and viewed. So I don't know if you've seen this before, but this is the French Pass Sanitaire. It is the software program utilized by the French government for basically, they have a vaccine mandate. And this occurred, I want to say, about 6 months ago. But this QRL code is what you use in order to get into restaurants or events or even work. It just depends. And there have been, there were 250,000 people who protested this and viewed it as a violation of rights. But France, at the time that this was instituted, had 54% of people who were 12 years old and older who were vaccinated. And that number is now at 88%. And while there was widespread concern, it's really been something that worked. So we now have President Biden's mandate, you should be familiar with, for federal contractors, and all employers over 100 employees are required to have a vaccine mandate. And that is going to be challenged in the courts. There have been probably, I think, 15 lawsuits or so filed. But everyone's sort of waiting for guidance with respect to that. But in the meantime, what we found is that many employers who wanted to issue a vaccine mandate in order to perhaps reduce the use of masks in particular isolated offices or otherwise change their, get more people back into the office, have used this as a welcome pretext to require this of employees. So we'll see where this goes. But from a data confidentiality standpoint, as an employer, how are you going to collect this information? Now, in France, they have this national software system. In the US, if you go online, there are a number of different options you can use. You could just say, hey, take a photo of your vaccination card and send it to me. But now you have protected health information that you're storing just on your regular on-premises computer. There are other software programs that will take it in the cloud and have it be there, and has a system for getting the download of the information. But if you haven't thought about this, it's something that I think all employers are going to be looking at, and we're going to see where we as a nation go. But technology, as you can tell, is an essential and elementary part of the work experience now. And this is just one example. While we're talking about technology and confidentiality, I know that many nonprofits use Blackbaud, or have used Blackbaud in the past, as their CRM software that allows them to assist with fundraising and other efforts. And if you aren't aware, in May of 2020, Blackbaud was subjected to a ransomware attack. And if you aren't familiar with ransomware, which most people are, that's when the hackers get into your system. They, in this case, exfiltrate some personal data that at first they thought that Blackbaud did not include any financial information. It turned out it did. And in July is when Blackbaud told the public that this had occurred. But they paid the ransom, and they and the hackers had said, okay, we accept your ransom and we have now gotten rid of the data. But you never know if you can trust the criminal that hacked you as a basis for saying we don't have a problem here. So that's one of the problems with ransomware. So what happened was in July, lots of nonprofits got this memo or email from Blackbaud that said, hey, you might have an issue if some people's data were affected by this. And so it really hasn't been a huge issue for, as far as we can tell, the nonprofits who are on the sort of retail side of purchasing Blackbaud or using it. But it just goes again to show you, just like with the passport for medical information, what data do you collect? How do you use it? Have you thought in terms of a data mapping of your organization? What are you keeping? Where are you keeping it? How long are you keeping it? And what kinds of permission and expectations of the data subjects are in place? And that starts with the privacy policy on your website and a variety of other protocols that you may have in place, which also drives the need for, as I started out talking about, the integration of IT with your operational efforts. So if you're talking to the IT folks, what are they going to be asking? And from their perspective, they're like, okay, are employees using company or personal equipment? Because if they're using their personal equipment, that makes it a little more complicated. If you want to take company data and secure it and make it so that you can wipe it if that person runs off from your operations and has this information that you view as confidential, how are you going to do it? It's called sandboxing from an IT perspective, where you maintain the ability to, on that personal device, to destroy that. But that's something the IT department will want to talk about. Can they help troubleshoot issues for Apple and for Microsoft and all Android, all the different systems that are out there? What kind of connectivity do employees have at home? If you have a dial-up modem and it's making that sound, you're going to be behind your peers. Have employees secured their Wi-Fi networks and changed router passwords? Most employees will not know how to change their router password, and they're going to be angry that it messes up their ability to download Netflix for a period of time material. So you need to be able to walk through that with your tech team. As I said, your tech team's ability to communicate with folks is going to be important to how this works. Do employees run security patches and updates for their devices? Do they have access to a VPN? Do they know how to use the personal hotspots on their phones in a pinch? This is one of those, when you were a kid, you had to know how to change a flat tire when you started driving a car. This is something that all people should know if they can. How do I use my personal hotspot so that I can communicate? And then finally, does everybody know how to host a video conference? So some other sort of further ideas in terms of IT and how to handle things. The SANS Institute is a great resource for individuals and companies that are trying to figure out, how do we do this better? And it has sort of from the most basic levels all the way down to really high intensive technical answers. And so here are just a few tips I wanted to point out. Change the default administrator passwords. So when you have whatever IoT device, whatever router, if you just leave that, and if you're a business and you just leave that, that means the hackers easily know how to find and get into your system. If you don't change that initial password that's default with the manufacturer, you're just a sitting duck. So that's something you should look at. Make sure that you have privilege analysis with respect to who you allow to engage in various activities in your system. And most of the monitoring systems that are looking internally at what's going on in your system will look for anomalies in terms of use. And one of the biggest problems are people who had certain privileges before, but now they don't necessarily need those privileges, but they keep them anyway, or you don't get rid of those. Those are the kinds of things that get used by hackers and other bad actors against your system. And then set up a guest network at your office. so that when you are actually in the office, you don't have anyone getting into your system. Likewise, at home, you want to do the exact same thing so that you are protected if the neighbor needs to use your Wi-Fi or your friend needs to use your Wi-Fi. They aren't getting into the system that's used for work. So I'll go back. So that's my last slide, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all today. And this is what we do on a regular basis: is work with IT folks and really help businesses and nonprofit or for-profit figure out how to best utilize the data for the benefit of their mission, but do so securely.
Thank you, Tedrick. I know I learned a lot out of that presentation. And we do have a question. So I've heard recently an increase in hackers going after Office 365 cloud networks. Do you have any suggestions on protecting data in the cloud?
Yes, so the cloud, to start with, the cloud is more secure generally than on-premises storage of data. And so that's why you've seen many businesses move to the cloud, and Microsoft Office 360 and Azure is frequently a choice of businesses, along with AWS. Because of that, there are now more sophisticated attacks at the cloud level for that data. And so the sort of pain point or the area of vulnerability that you have to be most concerned with is the portal through which your data goes to the cloud. So once it's in the cloud, it's pretty secure. The only downside of your data being in the cloud is that if you have a hack of, say, the cloud, and you're trying to figure out what's going on with your data, you'll hear from the cloud provider something along the lines of, well, your data is kind of mixed up with everybody else's unless you have a segregated cloud. But usually the issue is someone's looking at when someone's typing in that data and sending it to the cloud, or typing in the password, the administrative password to get into the cloud, or setting all that up. Someone may be looking at the keystrokes through some sort of hack or otherwise. That's the point of attack that you want to most focus on in order to prevent these kinds of issues like we have right now with Microsoft Office 365.
Great, thank you. I do not see any other questions at the moment. So Philomena, we can move on to you.
Wonderful. Great information, Tedrick. Is everyone's blood pressure up just slightly right now? Did you want to do we're going to do the polling question, correct?
Yes, and if people want to put this in the chat, okay, that would be great.
Okay, good. So we just thought it would be important. We're moving into talent now. So we talked about workplace, we talked about technology. Now we're going to talk about talent. So we would just love to know from you, how are you feeling today? And how are you really feeling? How many times does someone ask you that? You're like, good. Are you? Or do you listen to what someone has to say? And someone might be like, hey, Philomena, how are you doing when I go into Land O'Lakes? And they're halfway down the hall. I'm like, I'm doing okay. So let's see. So feel free to put that in the chat today. All right, so we'll check that in a moment, see if we get any response. Okay, fair to partly cloudy, tired. Okay, excited for a great day. Fine, actually. Oh, good. Feeling supported, exceptional, overwhelmed but motivated, hanging in. All right, thank you everyone for putting your comments in there. It just gives us a little bit of energy too to see what's happening. So what I'm going to do today is similar to Jacqueline. She had some research. I'm going to share a couple slides of research of kind of the changing workplace. And then I'm going to talk with you a little bit and share some of the things that we're doing at Land O'Lakes. And if you're not familiar with Land O'Lakes, we are a co-op. We have about 10,000 employees in the United States and global. I like to say we work with and for our farmers. And I've been at Land O'Lakes for 4 years. So continue to buy the butter. Thank you. All right, so here is, we've heard some of the different things, right? Some of the trends from what is the future of work and, rethinking the workplace. We've talked about that. Shifting talent and skills. So think about like maybe what was required for someone to work in your organization previously, and has it changed, and should it change? We've heard a lot about technology, so I don't have to steal any thunder from Tedrick, because he talked a lot about what is that technology? What do we need to do from a digital perspective, right? We heard a little bit more about managing in that hybrid work world from Jacqueline. And then we're going to talk about culture. And I'd like for you to really think about that today as we think about what is the culture within our organizations. You may have heard this term called the Great Attrition. You may have also heard the Great Resignation. And so with the impact of COVID, let's say the last 16, 18 months, one of the trends that's happening within our country, probably even within the world, is employees rethinking where they work, why they work, what's important to them. And many people are leaving organizations and maybe leaving an organization without another job lined up. And so what I'm going to do is share a little bit of data around what's happening. And this is kind of hard to see, so you may have to look a little bit closer, but the slides, I believe, will be shared afterwards. So here is a really interesting survey from McKinsey. The likelihood that an employer will leave their current job in 3 to 6 months, and 40% of employees stated that they are at least somewhat likely to leave their current job. And then you can look over on the right, from a survey perspective, from Microsoft, from Prudential, etc. And some different data points there. And then I would like you to use the chat now. And if I were to call you and try to recruit you away from your current employer, what would you say? Would you say yes, no, maybe? What are some of the reasons why you stay at your current organization? And so that's really my question. Why do you stay? What are some of those things that are really important to you to keep you at your organization? And I'd like for you to think about that from your vantage point, but futuristically, as you look at your nonprofit, be thinking about and talking with your employees about what's important to them, because that really makes a difference. All right, so Deb is talking about who she works with, important, because of the culture. And what is it about the culture that keeps you there? The mission. One of the things that's awesome about nonprofits is the mission. And many people are saying, hey, I want to work for an organization, right, that does good in the world. And we're seeing some of these other things come up: flexibility, culture, feeling valued by their organization. And those really align. If you look at this chart here, and I know this is a little bit hard, but this is from the employee perspective. These are the things that are really important to employees. So valued by manager. A lot of the research says the number one reason why someone stays or leaves their organization is who they report to, right? That my manager cares about me, that there's a sense of belonging. And for those of you that maybe have done the pivot to a remote workplace, how are you building in those touch points that might have happened, as Jacqueline said, when we meet for coffee or get together for lunch? The days that I go to Land O'Lakes, I organize an HR lunch bunch, and whoever is there within our department, we meet on the patio and have lunch, and it's super fun. So that value piece, caring, right? Potential for advancement. So really important that the employees that work with you, for you, know the trajectory. And so often as I talk with people, even my daughter, she was at a school and she put in her notice for another opportunity, and they said, oh my gosh, Bridget, we had a position for you and you would have been promoted. Okay, that was a miss, right? Because she didn't know what the future held for her. So as you look at this slide, think about those reasons, right, within your organization. Now, interesting, there's a disconnect because employers are seeing something different from their vantage point, but maybe not fully understanding some of those components that we just talked about, right? So the alignment around development opportunities, remote work, and that's a really important piece too. They may get recruited from another company or nonprofit, right? But employers have to pay attention to some of those things that you have shared in the chat about what's important to you, why you work, where you work. So here's some things to just think about from a next step perspective. So what are some of those things? Understanding where you stand and where your employees stand. Engage your team, have conversations about this. You know, what will keep you here? What would make you want to leave? We're talking a lot about that at Land O'Lakes so that we really have clarity and we can make sure that we focus in on those things. And then think about those skills for the future. What are some of those things that people need as we look into the future, right? Versus maybe what do we need at this point in time? And that importance of really listening to your employees. So what is it? Is it a listening session? Is it calling people together and really talking about some of these different pieces? And now I'll just briefly share with you a little bit about Land O'Lakes from a DEI perspective. And so be thinking about your organization. What is your commitment to culture? What is your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Do your employees know about that? So we have crafted a message kind of connecting the fact that we're a co-op, the connection to purpose, which is really important for employees, and then also really honoring all these different elements of diversity for our employees. And also thinking about what might be some of those barriers or systems that get in the way of success for our employees. This is a little bit hard to read, but as you think about your organization and we think about talent and we look at the workforce, so how do you recruit and how, right? Where and how do you recruit? Is that similar or different? Do you have opportunities for flexibility that maybe didn't exist before? Maybe that opens up your candidate pool. Where do you recruit? What are those resources? What are those sources? Where do you post your job? What do those job descriptions look like? Are you unintentionally missing candidates because of how you're phrasing the job description? I'll give you an example. We have a really amazing project that we're working on called the American Connection Project. And we're trying to figure out, by working with partners all across the country, how do we bring rural broadband to our rural communities? So think about the impact of this last year and a half, right? So we have this American Connection Project Fellow Program where we enlisted a nonprofit to help us recruit talent for it. Well, they suggested that the positions be age 18 to 24. And it got posted. And then we have an Aging Successfully Employee Resource Group. And they said, well, why is there an age limit on it? Wouldn't this be an amazing job for someone who maybe has left their organization that might be in transition, or someone who is retired but looking to refire their career? So what we did is we worked with the nonprofit to remove that age band, and amazing candidates applied from all across the country. So think about that. How do we build the culture? And many of you highlighted culture as something that was really important to you as to why you stay. So is it different if you're at your main building versus maybe a satellite campus? At Land O'Lakes, we have a headquarters, and then we have plants and facilities, and then we have people who work all across the country and globally, right, remotely. And one of the things that our employees have found, especially with the learning that we offer, is it's the great equalizer now, because we offer all the learning from a DEI perspective virtually. So it's not like some people are in the room and some people are via technology. So really important. We also have employee resource groups. Some of you may have that in your nonprofit or a team working on DEI within your organization. We also look at, what do we do from a business perspective and really integrating this DEI into how we do our business at Land O'Lakes. And then lastly, our fourth pillar is really focused on community. And you might not be able to see this, but we have a volunteer event today at our headquarters and all across the country. It's a competition. We are going to be packing food for different food banks across the country. And I am confident our team's going to rock it today when I get to work. But, you know, you are all in nonprofit work, or many of you are. And so for us, from a standpoint of our organization, many times that's a way for people to feel connected, to volunteer on site. We did a lot of volunteering virtually. It gives our employees purpose, right? And a connection to the organization and to their colleagues. And then lastly, I'll just share with you, I'm a quote lady. My mom's from Ireland, so my heritage is Irish. And I think it goes back there to Ireland, but just that intentionality about thinking about what are each of our roles, right? As we move through this world, and whether it's in the community, in our families, where we work, that intention around doing good. And it might just be that incremental thing that you do that day that really makes someone else's day so much better. So thanks for inviting me, and Deb, back to you.
Thank you, Philomena. I'm checking the chat, and right now I do not see, oh, I do have a question. Okay. Organizations talk a lot about culture, but what if the culture that is defined by senior management, collaborative, for example, is viewed differently, top-down leadership, for example, by the employee?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And that really goes to the piece around understanding. Like we saw those two slides, and there was a disconnect between what employers thought and what employees thought. And so I would ask that question, you know, within your organization, within your department, what is culture? What's important to you? What will keep you here? What makes you feel that sense of belonging? They say that about 60% of people in the workplace cover who they really are when they go to work, right? So think about how much energy that takes. So I think the piece is really kind of from the top all the way to every level within the organization, having those conversations.
Thank you. I do not see any other questions at this time, so we are going to move forward into breakout rooms. Oh, actually, hold on. I have one more question. We've got time to take this. Would perspectives of return to work, hybrid or remote, be different if our media captured more than Amazon, Google, or Target?
Oh, that's a really good question, because you're right. It is perception, and not every organization has that hipster environment or even the workplace looks like that. But I think Jacqueline made a really good point about what is it? What's the why? What makes someone want to come back to your workplace? If they can, but you know, like we're going to have employees, and when we kind of had a goal to have everyone come back after Labor Day who work at headquarters, many had underlying health conditions or things that were happening at home that would prevent them from coming in. And then many groups are saying, hey, let's designate a day or 2 days where the team comes in so we can do that collaboration and build those connections. And then think about, for those employees who are not able to physically be there, how do we keep that connection so that people don't feel that sense of isolation? Right? So they feel that connection to one another. And Jacqueline, I see you brought your camera on, so you might have additional points to that question.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Philomena. 2 comments. Folks may have read the news about Google acquiring a building in Manhattan, largest acquisition this year. And they've been a leader with respect to embracing remote work and hybrid. But I think that also sends a message that they very much believe in the physical bricks and mortar, underscoring that the in-person opportunities promote better collaboration and engagement and innovation. I would also suggest that, you know, I think we've heard a lot about how important it is to listen to your employees. And so, yes, there's news headlines here and there, but what are your employees feeling and what are they hearing if they're being recruited by other employers? And some of this is not through a big formal survey, because quite frankly, many people are fatigued by the surveys. So it's more one-on-ones, you know, direct report conversations that perhaps are casual in nature, but just get a feel for where people are at. We can't control what the media is going to share, but I think it's interesting that both Amazon and Google, while they embrace the remote work, they're very much planting flags with the physical office is here to stay and it's important. So I think it boils down to the type of talent you need and the functions you're going to have. And they're both organizations that have a widespread spectrum of types of employees. So they're going to have both.
Thank you. And I do have another question. Are there any suggestions to connect staff that may be the only employee in a specific city? For instance, if you have headquarters in the Twin Cities, but one staff member is in New Orleans.
I'll add, and then feel free, Jacqueline or Tedrick, if you want to add on. I think a really important piece is when meetings happen to make sure you have the voice of the employee who's not in the room, creating space for that, or even a check-in. So as you start your meeting, people can, just like we said today, how are you feeling? How are you really feeling? Virtual coffees could be a good way too for that employee to connect with other people on the team so that they keep that sense of connection. And then I think whoever is managing that person to do, you know, periodic check-ins, because you may not see them informally in the workplace. Those are a couple of my ideas.
I totally agree with that. And I think it's just really important that, you know, that virtual experience is set up well in advance. In other words, that remote person is not the last person invited or the afterthought, oh gosh, we need to send a link out for everybody. It's really important to be mindful of meeting folks where they're at and having that connectivity.
Okay, we'll do one more question before we go into our breakout rooms. For lower wage positions that are being abandoned, what will bring them back?
That's a really good question. So what's the why, right? So with those lower wage positions, is it, I mean, look at some of the organizations, what are, you know, do you have benefits that might be of interest for employees, or like going back to school? What's happening within your organization, you know, to want them to come back? Are there opportunities for career development? So maybe I start in this lower wage position, but I know that if I do this, then I could have an opportunity to move to that next level, that career advancement opportunities. Development, I think, is really good. You know, like what could you do within your organization to help people feel like I may be starting here in this position, but I have the opportunity to advance.
Great. Okay, Allie, do you want to help us move into our breakout rooms?
Yes, let me get those open right now. And what everyone is going to do is we can go to the next slide. We will have the 4 breakout rooms. Deb, if you want to comment on the breakout rooms prior to me opening them so people know what they're choosing.
Yes. So we thought it would be nice to try and get a little bit more interaction since we are doing this virtual. And so we're going to continue the conversations on workplace, technology, and talent within specific breakout rooms. So if there's one of these that you have some questions that you'd like to ask, or just hear perspectives of your peers that are here today, that's the room that you're going to want to join. And if you don't have any questions specific to either of those, you can join the 4th room with me for just a general discussion about today's seminar.
And I will open them up all right now. And you should get a screen in the center of your screen right now popping up. It should allow you to choose which room to join. So please take a moment and go ahead and choose which room you'd like to join.
To interact and have some more conversation with the peers that are on this morning, we wanted to bring you back and just, utilize the chat function and, really talk about how will we translate what we heard today into action. So what is one key thing that you learned? How are you going to share this information back within your organization? Or what is something that you're going to do differently? If you can pop that into the chat for all of us to take a look at, that would be wonderful. And while people are doing that, Allie, you can go to our final slide. I just want to, again, thank everyone for your spending time with us this morning. On behalf of all of the sponsors of the seminar, we greatly appreciate you joining us. And we are going to be sending out a follow-up email that's going to contain the slides from today's seminar. It's going to contain contact information. So if you have specific questions that you'd like to reach out to individuals, you have that. And then we're also going to ask just a few brief survey questions to help us gauge, what you liked about the content, and if you have any other topics or suggestions that you'd like us to consider for our September seminar next year. So I'm reading some of the chats here. Great, being intentional about trying to meet everyone where they're at. Sounds like everyone had great discussion in their breakout rooms. Well, I hope this has energized you to keep going through the rest of your day. And again, thank you for joining us.